The peat has gone down 4 meters since 1852, and this summer it gave back the thing lying under our fen. It does not want my years. It wants a name, and it takes that person's health, and I have given it 3. The post at home fen is the measurement everybody uses, and if you have never seen it, it is a cast iron column driven down through the peat into the clay in 1852 with its top set level with the ground, and today its top stands 4 meters above the field. That is not subsidence. That is the ground going away. Peat is dead plants that never rotted because they were under water, and the moment you drain it and let air at it, it starts rotting again, and it goes down and it does not come back, and everything my family has done for 6 generations has been the drainage that does it. I am the engineer for the middle level board that covers 11,000 hectares between the 2 rivers. My father held the same post. His mother kept the pump logs at Hollow Drove, and a hand you could read across a room. We are the people who take the water off, and taking the water off is the reason there is a foot less of this county every 20 years, and everybody here knows it, and nobody here says it, and that is the actual weather of this place, not the wind. This was the driest summer since records, and by the end of July the black land north of the Drove had cracked open in fissures you could put your arm into, and the fen started giving things back, which is what it does. A bog road first, oak and hazel hurdles laid across the soft ground, 2,500 years old, 40 meters of it lifting out of a field of failed beet. Then a wicker fish trap. Then, on the 11th of August, in the corner of Hollow Drove Fen, where the peat is deepest and where nobody farms because it will not hold a tractor, something else. And I want to be accurate here because I have had 2 years to find words for it, and I still have not. There was nothing to look at. There was no shape and no light, and nothing came out of the ground. What there was, standing at the edge of that corner at 9 in the evening in the heat with the pumps running 2 fields away, was the sensation of standing beside a very large machine and understanding, without being told, what the machine wants. It had been there before the Drove and before the drains and before the Abbey took the fen in 1140, and it did not resent the drainage. It said, and I am putting words on a thing that did not use them, that the drainage had been very good for it, and that was the first moment I was frightened. It does not want years off me. That is the first thing I asked, standing in a beet field like a fool, because I have read the same books everybody has read, and I assumed it would be years or memory or something off my own body. It wants a name. You say a name out loud, at that corner, and it takes that person's health, and in exchange it answers what you ask. It does not negotiate, and it does not explain, and it does not tell you in advance what will be taken or how much, and I have never once had the sense that it enjoys any of it. It is not malevolent, it is agricultural, and here is the part that took me until about the second name to understand, and that is the whole of why I am telling this at all. It never chooses. I choose. Every single price paid in this account was paid by a person whose name came out of my mouth, in my voice, deliberately, after thinking about it, and there is no version of this where I am the one being charged. I have heard people say afterward that the thing used me. It did not use me. It made me an offer with completely transparent terms, and I accepted it 3 times. I asked it, that first evening, whether it had done this before, and it did not answer, because I had not paid. And I stood in that field for about 2 hours, and then walked home along the Drove past the Hollow Drove station, with the pumps going. And the station is where my nephew drowned, and I want to tell you now that I did not go back to that corner for 6 weeks, and that I thought about it every hour of every one of them. My nephew was 19. Davey Sowerby, my sister Lorna's boy, and he worked for the board because everybody in my family works for the board, and he had been on the payroll 14 months, and he was better at it than I was at his age. On the 22nd of December 2019, there was a tidal surge on top of 11 days of rain, and Hollow Drove Station, which is a 1953 pumping station with 3 pumps and a wet well 11 meters deep, took water over the intake, and the wet well flooded to the top of the chamber, and Davey was in it. 4 things about Davey, because otherwise he is a mechanism, and he was a boy. He was frightened of the wet well, and told me so once, at 16 on a Sunday, and made me promise not to tell his mother, and I did not, and I have wondered since whether that promise was the first link in the whole chain. He could not spell, and he wrote everything down anyway, and the log sheets in his hand from that autumn are in a box in the office, and they are semi-legible and completely accurate. He had a theory that the fen was flat because God had run out of ideas, which he produced at Christmas dinner in 2018 to an audience of his grandmother, and it is the funniest thing anybody in my family has ever said. And in the November before he died, he asked me, in the yard, whether the pumps were meant to run like that, meaning continuously, meaning for weeks, and I said they were running to the instruction. He asked the question. A 19-year-old on 14 months' service stood in a yard and asked the only intelligent question anybody asked about Hollow Drove between 2013 and 2019, and the board's engineer told him it was to the instruction, and 5 weeks later he was in the wet well. The inquest recorded misadventure. The finding was that he had entered a confined space to clear a screen without the second man the procedure requires, that he was 19 and keen, and had done it before, and that on any other night it would have been fine. And that is true. Every word of that is true, and it is the reason it went away so quietly, and it is why for 6 years I accepted it. What is also true, and what is not anywhere in that inquest, is why the wet well was full. A station like that does not flood because the river is high. It floods because it stops pumping, and the pumps at Hollow Drove stopped at 11 minutes past 4 on the morning of the 22nd, because the board had been running all 3 units at close to continuous duty since the 9th to hold the level down over the black land, and continuous duty on 1953 pumps for 13 days does exactly what you would expect, and Unit 2 failed, and Unit 3 failed 40 minutes later, and Unit 1 could not hold it on its own. Why were they running them like that? That is the whole question, and it is a question about peat, and it is the question nobody in that village hall has ever wanted asked. Because holding the level lower than the drainage design requires is what you do if you want to bring peat land into arable production, and peat land in arable production is worth 11 times what it is worth as wet grazing. And there are 4 farms on that fen that went from grazing to sugar beet and potatoes between 2012 and 2018. And the total additional pumped hours across those 6 years is a number I could not get anybody to give me for 6 years, and that I now know to 5 decimal places. I gave it a name in the October. The first one was Colin Raitt, and I want to be honest about why I chose him first, because it was not justice. Colin Raitt farms 900 acres on the north side. He is the loudest man on that board. He has told me to my face in a public meeting that a woman engineer would be better employed managing an office, and I disliked him more than I have ever disliked anybody. He was not the architect. I did not know that then, and I am not sure it would have stopped me. I stood in the corner of Hollow Drove Fen on the 9th of October at about 7 in the evening, and I said his name out loud, twice, because the first time it came out as nothing, and I asked why the pumps had been running continuously in December 2019, and it answered, not in words and not in a vision, and if you are expecting me to describe a voice, I cannot. It was as though I had already known the answer for years and had merely been unable to bring it forward, and now it was there in the front of my head with the same texture as a thing I had worked out myself. Continuous duty had been authorized as a standing instruction in March 2013 and had never been reviewed, and I went home and looked, and it took 40 minutes in the board's own minute book, which is on a shelf in the office I sit in every day, and it is there. Item 11, March 2013, a standing instruction to maintain summer level over the North Fen through the winter period, proposed by the clerk, carried, and never once brought back to the board in 11 years. Colin Raitt had a stroke on the 14th of October. He was 58. He is alive. He is at home. He has no speech to speak of, and he will not farm again, and his son has sold 400 acres. And I sat in my car outside the hospital on the 16th, and I did not cry, and I did not pray, and what I did was open my notebook and write down the next question, and that is the sentence I would put on my own headstone if I were being truthful about myself. There is a wastage report dated 2011. I did not need the thing under the fen to find it, in the end, which is the part I have gone over more than any other. I could have found it in 2020 by writing one letter. It is a report commissioned by the board itself from a soil scientist at a university, 41 pages, on peat wastage rates across the district under different water level regimes. And its conclusion is that maintaining summer levels through winter over the North Fen would increase wastage from about 11 millimeters a year to somewhere between 26 and 34, and that at that rate the peat over the northern third would be gone entirely, down to the clay, within about 70 years, and the drainage infrastructure would then be pumping a landscape that no longer needs draining, at a cost nobody has budgeted for. It was received by the clerk on the 9th of February 2011. It has never appeared on an agenda. It is not in the minute book. It is not in the annual report, and the 11 members of that board, 4 of whom are the farmers whose land went to arable in 2013, have never seen it, and I believe that because I have watched 3 of their faces when it was put in front of them. I should say what my father was, because he sat in this chair, and he is the reason I can read a pump log at a glance, and the reason it took me 6 years to look at one properly. Ray Sowerby was the board's engineer from 1988 to 2011, and he was, by every account, including the ones that did not like him, extremely good. He knew every siphon and every soak dike in 11,000 hectares. He also believed, absolutely, that the board was a good thing being run by decent men doing a difficult job in a landscape that was against them, and he taught me that, and I believed it until I was 42. He retired in the March of 2011. The wastage report was received in the February of 2011. His last full month in that office is the month it came in, and it is not in his handover file, and I have gone through that file 4 times looking for it, and it is not there, and there are exactly 2 explanations, and I have never been able to choose between them, and my father died in 2017. Gerald Prake has been clerk to that board since 1999. He is 67. He is not a member, and he does not vote, and his salary is $14,000 a year, and in 26 years he has never expressed an opinion in a meeting in his life. He says, the board may wish to note. He says, that would be a matter for the engineer. He says, I think that is within your gift, Chairman. And he writes the agenda, which is the entire job, because a thing that is not on the agenda has not happened. The second name I gave was a man called Ivo Strack, who was the board's chairman from 2009 to 2016, and who is 81 and lives in Wisbech, and I gave it because I needed to know whether the 2013 standing instruction had been discussed anywhere off the record, and the answer that arrived in my head was that it had, in the clerk's office, twice, before the meeting, with 2 members present and no minute taken. Ivo Strack fell in his kitchen on the 2nd of November and broke a hip and did not come out of hospital, and he died in the March of something else that started there, and I went to the funeral and stood at the back, and his daughter thanked me for coming. They came at me in the January, and it was done gently, and it was the most effective thing anybody did to me in 2 years. I had asked in writing for the December 2019 SCADA logs, which are on our own server and which I am entitled to as the engineer, and 9 days later I had an email from the chairman, copied to the clerk, saying that in view of the personal circumstances the board wished to offer me support, and that it had been agreed that any historical record requests relating to the 2019 event should be routed through the clerk's office, so that I was not carrying it alone. One sentence, entirely kind on its face, and its whole effect was that every document I asked for from that point would be handed to me by the man who had amended the return. and attached to it was a referral form to the authorities' occupational health provider, unsigned, with a note that I might find it helpful, and I want to be exact about how that lands on a woman who has been standing in a field at 9 in the evening. It is not a threat. Nobody threatened me once in 2 years. It is an offer of help, made in writing, by people who like me, and it turns every subsequent thing you say about the board into a symptom. I did not sign it, and I did not refuse it. I thanked the chairman, said I would think about the occupational health referral, and pulled the SCADA logs myself that same afternoon before the routing arrangement was set up, because it had been agreed at a meeting and not yet implemented. And there is always a fortnight between those two things in any organization on Earth, and that fortnight is where every piece of evidence I have ever obtained has come from. That is where the story stops being about a drainage board. I want to be exact about the shape of the next 4 months, because everybody assumes that a person with a thing like that at the bottom of the field becomes powerful, and what actually happens is the opposite. After Strack, I stopped sleeping. Not from horror, from arithmetic. I had bought 2 answers, both of which I could have obtained in a fortnight from a records office and a retired member's memory, and I had paid for them with a man's speech and an old man's hip, and the only thing the bargain had actually saved me was time. That is the whole of it. It does not give you anything you could not get. It gives you it faster, and the speed is the product. And I have thought since that this is the most honest description of every bad thing I have ever seen done in a public body. Somebody was in a hurry and somebody else paid for the hurry. And Lorna knew. My sister has known me for 44 years, and she came to my house on the 9th of December, which is 13 days before the anniversary, and she sat at my table and she said, "You've started on it again." And I said I had. And she said, "Etta, he was 19 and he went into a hole he'd been told 9 times not to go into on his own. And I have made my peace with that. And every time you pull at this, you take it off me and hand it back. And that is the true thing, and it is the reason it took 6 years, because Lorna Sowerby has never once in her life asked me for anything, and she asked me for that. And then she said the sentence that got through, which was, "And I don't know what you're doing, but you look like Mom did in 1998. Our mother did the drainage books for this board for 19 years and had what my father called her nerves and what a doctor would now call something with a name, and she died at 61. And there is a version of me at 44 sitting in a beet field at 9 in the evening talking to the ground that would fit into my mother's outline exactly, and my sister put that in front of me on the 9th of December in my own kitchen and then left. I gave the 3rd name on the 22nd of December. I gave it Gerald Prake's own daughter's name, which is Etta Prake, 34, who works for the water company at Peterborough, and I gave it because I needed to know whether the pump run hours for December 2019 had been amended before they went to the coroner, and I could not get at that any other way, because the return went from the clerk's office direct to the coroner's officer, and the board's own copy is the clerk's copy, and it answered yes. Amended on the 9th of January 2020, by hand, on the face of the return, 41 hours removed. And Etta Prake, who has never done anything to anybody, was diagnosed in the February. I need to say this plainly and then go on. I did that, not the thing in the ground. I stood in a field 2 days before the anniversary of my nephew's death, and I said an innocent woman's name out loud because I wanted a document. And she is 34, and she has an illness now, and I put it in her. And there is no arrangement of the facts in which that is anything else. I have not told her. I have not told her father, and he does not know. And the reason I have never told either of them is not mercy. It is that I cannot stand to. And the reason the rest of this happened at all is that on the 10th of February, sitting in the office with the amended return in front of me and the diagnosis 2 days old, I stopped. I did not stop out of remorse, or not only. I stopped because I finally understood the shape of what I had been doing, which is that I had spent 4 months using a mechanism that charges other people in order to avoid the 4 or 5 months of tedious, ordinary, entirely available work that would have got me the same 4 facts, and that I had told myself the whole time that I was doing it for Davey. Thank you for listening to Channel Crystal Novel. So from February, I did it the slow way, and it took 7 months, and here is all of it. A written request to the university for their copy of the 2011 report, which they had, and which cost £19. A request to the coroner's office for the pump return as submitted in 2020, which a properly interested person can make, and which took 11 weeks and 1 refusal and 1 appeal. The board's own SCADA logs for December 2019, which are on a server in the office I work in, and which I am entitled to as the engineer, and which nobody had looked at since. And the maintenance records for Units 2 and 3, which show that both had been flagged for bearing wear in the September, and that the work had been deferred to the following financial year on the clerk's advice about the timing of the precept. The refusal is worth describing, because it is the ordinary shape of this, and nobody warns you. The coroner's office said no to the pump return in the April on the ground that the material formed part of a concluded inquest, and that disclosure to an interested person after conclusion required the coroner's direction. That is correct. It is also, if you accept it, the end, and I very nearly accepted it, because it arrived on headed paper, and I am a person who was raised to believe headed paper. What I did instead took one evening and a library computer. I read the rule, which is public, and the rule says an interested person may apply, and the definition of interested person includes a relative, and I am the deceased's aunt, and I had been treated as an interested person at the original inquest in 2020 and had a letter from that time proving it. So I applied again in the May with the letter attached, and it was granted in the June, and the whole difference between no and yes was that the first time I asked as the board's engineer and the second time I asked as Davey's aunt, and it had never once occurred to me that those were different people with different rights. 4 documents, 7 months, £19, and about 40 hours of my own time, and every single one of them was available to me in 2020, and if I had gone at it that way then, Colin Raitt would still be farming, and Ivo Strack would have died in his own bed at 82, and Etta Prake would be well. Gerald Prake followed me out onto the bog. That was the 11th of September, in the evening, after the board meeting at which I had asked, under any other business, for the 2011 report to be tabled at the November meeting, which is the only thing I ever said out loud in a meeting about any of it. He came out along the drove behind me in his car and left it at the gate and walked out across the cracked ground in his work shoes. And he is 67, and it is not easy walking, and he came right up to me at the corner where the peat is deepest, and he was shaking. And what he said, before anything else, was, "Did you name me?" I want you to understand that I had told nobody, not Lorna, not the board, not a doctor, nobody, ever in 2 years. But Gerald Prake had watched Colin Raitt have a stroke in the October, and an old chairman fall in the November, and his own daughter get a diagnosis in the February, and he had watched the board's engineer walk out to the same corner of the same field on evenings for 4 months, and he had grown up in that village where everybody's grandmother knew what the bog was, and he had put it together the way a clerk puts things together, which is quietly and completely and without telling anybody. And he stood in front of me on ground that has gone down 4 meters since 1852, and asked me whether I had said his name, and I did not answer him, not to be cruel. I stood there and I looked at him, and I did not say one word, for what he later told the board was about 2 minutes, and what I would have said was 30 seconds, because the honest answer was no, and I could not make my mouth produce it, because saying no meant explaining who I had said instead. And the third name was his daughter. So I said nothing, and he took the nothing for a yes, and he went back to his car. and the thing under the fen has not spoken to me since that evening. Not once, in 2 years. I have been back out there in every season, in the wet and in the dry, and stood in the corner and asked, and there is nothing there at all, and I have come to think that it went quiet, not because I refused it, but because for the first time since August I had come out to that field wanting nothing. The inquiry was reopened in the spring. Gerald Prake did not wait for the November meeting. On the 18th of September, 7 days after the bog, he wrote a letter to the chairman and copied it to the Environment Agency and to the coroner, and it is 9 pages long, and it sets out the 2011 report, the 2013 standing instruction, the deferral of the bearing work, and the amendment of the pump return on the 9th of January 2020, all of it, in order, in a clerk's prose, with the enclosures numbered. He did not have to. Nothing was coming for him. The 4 documents I had spent 7 months getting the slow way would have done it without him, and would have taken another 2 years. And he handed the whole thing over in 9 pages, because he believed he had been named at a bog, and had about a month to live, and wanted to be a man who had said it himself. That is the only thing in this account that I did not do, and could not have done, and it was done by the architect, out of terror, on the basis of something that was not true. He is alive. He is 69 now, and perfectly well, and works 2 days a week for a farm secretary in Chatteris. He was dismissed in the October. The board was placed under a governance direction, and he was not prosecuted because keeping a report off an agenda for 14 years is not a criminal offense, and because the amendment of the pump return, was out of time. The coroner reopened the inquest into Davey, and the fresh finding, 18 months later, was accidental death contributed to by neglect, which is a specific term, and which means the system that was supposed to keep him alive did not. And my sister sat in that court and heard the word neglect said out loud about her son by a man in a wig, and she has told me twice that she wishes she had not, and once that she is glad. Both are true, and I am not going to arbitrate them. The Environment Agency's review went wider than us, because it always does, and 11 other internal drainage boards in the region were asked to confirm whether they held any commissioned soil or wastage study not tabled to their members, and 4 of them did, and 2 of those 4 have since tabled them, and the other 2 gave an answer the review describes as unsatisfactory and are not named. The association issued guidance the following year that a report commissioned by a board is a record of the board and must be listed on the agenda of the next ordinary meeting following receipt, which is 1 sentence, which costs nothing, and which would have made 14 years of this impossible in 2011. The coroner's prevention of future deaths report named the deferral of the bearing work and went to the board, the association, and the agency, and the response to it is public and is 4 pages of the most careful prose I have ever read. Our own confined space procedure was rewritten and now requires the permit to be signed by the engineer personally and not by the clerk's office, which is where it had sat since 2004 because it was administratively tidier. The standing instruction was revoked. Winter levels over the North Fen went back to design in the 2nd year, and about 1,100 acres have gone from arable back to wet grazing under a scheme that pays the farmers to do it, and the wastage rate over that ground is back to something like 12 millimeters a year, which means the peat that is left will be there in 140 years instead of 70, and that is the only thing in this entire account that will still matter when everybody in it is dead. The 2011 report was tabled at the November meeting in the end by me. At the meeting, Gerald Prake had already resigned before. It took 9 minutes. Nobody had anything to say about it. I still hold the post. That surprises people, and it surprises me. There was a period in the 2nd year when I expected to be asked to go, and I was not, and the new chairman, who is a woman from outside the district, and who I like enormously, told me in her first month that the reason was that I was the only person in the office who had asked for the report to be tabled, which is true, and which is about 4% of what actually happened. So I sit in the same office my father sat in, under the same photograph of Hollow Station in 1953, and I do the levels and the pump schedules and the biennial survey, and once a year I go out with a surveyor and we measure the ground against the post, and it has gone down another 9 millimeters, and it will go down another 9 next year. And there is no version of my working life in which the thing I do for a living is not also the thing that is eating this county. I have made a sort of peace with that, and it is not a comfortable one. Colin Wright's son brings the beat contract in himself now, and we are civil in a way his father and I never were. Evo Strack's daughter sent me a card at Christmas for 2 years and then stopped, which is correct. Hetty Prake is 36, and her treatment finished in the spring, and the last thing I heard from a woman in the office whose sister works with her is that she is well, and I have taken that, and I have not gone looking for anything more precise, because there is a version of this where I go and find out, and it is not true, and I do not think I would survive it. The board asked me in the second year to write a note for the members on what the district would look like in 2100 under 3 water level regimes, and I wrote it 11 pages, and it is the most useful thing I have produced in 20 years, and about 9 people have read it. The honest finding is that under any regime we can afford, the northern third goes, not in my lifetime, in my nephew's if he had been given one. I do not go to the corner any more, not because I am frightened of it, because there is nothing there, and standing in a cracked field in the evening, asking a piece of ground for something, is a thing my mother would have recognized, and I have a sister who watched me do it for 4 months, and who has never once brought it up since. Lorna and I have Sunday lunch. Her second boy is 22, and works for the board, which I fought and lost, and he is on the confined space rota, and he has never once in 3 years gone into a chamber without the second man, because his aunt is the engineer, and the engineer signs the permit, and the engineer has been, since 2021, an absolute cow about it, in a way the whole yard finds very funny. That is the memorial, not the finding, not the notice, not 1,100 acres of wet grazing. A 22-year-old who is irritated by a form. And what I would say to you, since you have stood in that field with me the whole way, is the only thing I actually learned in 2 years, which is that the bargain was never the ground, and it was never the price. Everything it gave me was already lying in a drawer 11 feet from my desk. It only ever sold me the thing I actually wanted, which was not to have to spend 7 months being patient, and I paid for that with a man's speech, an old man's hip, and a stranger's health, and there is no fen in England deep enough to put that under. So here is what I want to know from you. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice, if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next